Ji-won Park pushed open the heavy glass door of Metropolitan Bank and stepped inside. The cool air conditioning was a welcome relief from the hot Tuesday afternoon sun. She had just finished volunteering at the community center, helping younger kids with their homework. Her hoodie and jeans were comfortable and she carried a small backpack over one shoulder. Inside her backpack was an envelope. Inside that envelope was $8,000. Ji-won had worked hard for this money. She spent the entire summer as a lifeguard at the local pool, waking up early every morning and sitting under the hot sun. That job gave her $3,500. She also won a National Merit Scholarship worth $3,000. Her relatives gave her $1,500 for her 17th birthday last month. Now she wanted to put it all safely in her bank account. The bank was busy. Several customers stood in line waiting for the tellers. Ji-won took her place at the end of the line and pulled out her phone to pass the time. She was excited. This money would help pay for college next year. She had worked so hard for her grades and her test scores. Everything was finally coming together. When Ji-won reached the front of the line, a woman behind the counter waved her forward. The nameplate on the desk read Sandra Whitmore. Sandra was a white woman who looked to be in her mid-40s. She had short brown hair and wore a dark blue blazer. She smiled at Ji-won, but the smile did not reach her eyes. Ji-won placed her deposit slip on the counter along with the envelope. She had filled out the slip carefully at home, writing her account number and the amount in neat handwriting. Sandra picked up the envelope and looked inside. Her expression changed immediately. The fake smile disappeared. She looked at Ji-won with narrow eyes. "Where did you get this money?" Sandra asked. Her voice was loud enough that people nearby turned to look. Ji-won felt her stomach tighten. "I earned it," she said politely, "from my summer job. And I got a scholarship." Sandra pulled the cash out and started counting it slowly. She made a show of holding each bill up to the light as if checking for counterfeits. "This is a lot of money for someone your age," she said. Her voice carried across the bank lobby. "How do I know this is really yours?" Ji-won felt her face grow hot. Other customers were definitely watching now.
"I have my pay stubs," she said quietly.
She reached into her backpack and pulled out the papers. "And my scholarship letter. It's all here." Sandra barely glanced at the documents. "These could be fake," she said dismissively. "We get people trying to deposit stolen money all the time." She raised her voice even more. "People like you come in here with cash and expect us not to ask questions." The words hit Ji-won like a slap. "People like you." She knew exactly what Sandra meant. Ji-won was black. That was what Sandra saw. Not a hardworking student, not a scholarship winner, just a black teenage girl who must have done something wrong to have this much money. "These aren't fake," Ji-won said, trying to keep her voice steady. "You can call my employer. The Scholarship Foundation. I can prove everything." Sandra shook her head. "I don't think so, Mr. Peterson," she called out. "Can you come here, please?" A balding white man in a suit emerged from an office. He looked confused. "What's the problem, Sandra?" "This girl is trying to deposit $8,000, Sandra announced to the entire bank. "She won't tell me where she really got it. I think we need to verify the source. This could be drug money. Or stolen." Ji-won felt tears starting to form in her eyes. She blinked them back. She would not cry, not here. Not in front of all these people. Some of them were recording on their phones now. She could see them holding up their cameras. "I told you where I got it," Ji-won said. Her voice shook despite her efforts to control it. "I worked for it. Why won't you believe me?" Mr. Peterson looked uncomfortable. He glanced at the pay stubs and scholarship letter that Ji-won had provided. "These look legitimate," he said quietly to Sandra. "They could be forged," Sandra insisted. "We need to protect the bank. I think we should call the police. Let them sort this out." "The police?" Ji-won could not believe what she was hearing. "For depositing my own money?" Several customers in line were shaking their heads. An older black woman muttered something about discrimination. A young white man filmed everything on his phone, his face angry. "Maybe you should come back another day," Mr. Peterson suggested weakly. "With your parents. They can verify everything." "My father is at work," Ji-won explained. "I'm 17 years old. I have an account here. I've had it for 3 years." "Why is this suddenly a problem?" Sandra crossed her arms. "Because you never deposited this much money before. It's suspicious. Where's your father anyway? Does he even know you have this cash?" The implication was clear. Sandra was suggesting that Ji-won's father was not around, that he was absent. It was another stereotype, another insult piled on top of all the others. Ji-won's hands were shaking now. She wanted to scream. She wanted to tell Sandra exactly what she thought of her. But she knew that would only make things worse. An angry black teenager would just confirm whatever Sandra already believed about her. You know what? Ji-won said quietly. Forget it. Give me back my money. Sandra looked triumphant. She slid the cash back across the counter. I thought so, she said smugly. If it was legitimate, you wouldn't have a problem with us checking. The problem is you treating me like a criminal, Ji-won said. She was proud that her voice did not break. I showed you proof. You just don't want to believe it. She grabbed her money and her papers and shoved them back into her backpack. As she turned to leave, she saw the other customers watching her. Some looked sympathetic. Others looked away. Nobody said anything to help her. At the counter next to Sandra's station, a young Latina teller named Maria caught Ji-won's eye. Wait, Maria called out softly. She looked nervous. I can help you. If you still want to make the deposit, Ji-won hesitated. Sandra glared at Maria. I'm handling this, Sandra snapped. You said she should leave, Maria replied. Her voice was quiet but firm. So I can help her now. Sandra started to argue, but her phone rang. She grabbed it and walked away, still glaring at both Maria and Ji-won. Maria processed the deposit quickly and professionally. She looked at the pay stubs and scholarship letter. Congratulations on the scholarship, she said genuinely. That's really impressive. Thank you, Ji-won whispered. She could barely speak. The humiliation was crushing her chest, making it hard to breathe. Maria handed her the deposit receipt. I'm sorry, she said quietly. That shouldn't have happened. Ji-won took the receipt and walked toward the exit. Her vision was blurry with tears. She kept her head down, not wanting anyone to see her face. Behind her, she heard Sandra return to her station. Through the glass door, she could see Sandra watching her with a satisfied expression. Ji-won made it to her car before the tears really started. She sat in the driver's seat and cried, her whole body shaking. She had never felt so small, so humiliated in her life. Everyone had seen. Everyone had heard Sandra accusing her of being a thief, a liar, a criminal. After several minutes, Ji-won wiped her eyes and pulled out her phone. She called her father with trembling fingers. Hi, sweetie. Min-seok Kim answered cheerfully. Did you make your deposit? Ji-won tried to speak, but only a sob came out. Ji-won, what's wrong? What happened? Through tears, Ji-won told him everything. About Sandra's accusations. About being treated like a criminal in front of everyone. About the looks, the cameras, the humiliation. Her father was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was tight with anger. I'm leaving work right now. Stay where you are. We're going to fix this. Dad, I just want to go home, Ji-won said. Okay, drive home safely. We'll talk when I get there. Ji-won ended the call and sat in the car for another minute. She looked back at the bank through her windshield. Sandra was visible through the window back at her station, helping another customer as if nothing had happened. Ji-won opened her backpack to put her phone away. That was when she saw it, a business card tucked into the side pocket. Her father had given it to her months ago, telling her to keep it safe. It belonged to one of his friends from college. The name on the card read Yoon Soo-jin, and underneath it said Federal Reserve Bank Compliance Officer. Ji-won stared at the card. Her father had told her that Soo-jin worked to make sure banks followed the rules, that she investigated banks that broke the law or treated customers unfairly. Something stirred in Ji-won's chest. Not just anger anymore, something else. A question. Was what Sandra did just racism, or was there something more wrong happening at that bank? Ji-won took a photo of the card with her phone. Then she started her car and drove home, her mind already working. She had been humiliated today. But maybe, just maybe, she could make sure it never happened to anyone else. Min-seok Kim arrived home 2 hours later, looking angrier than Ji-won had ever seen him. He dropped his briefcase by the door and pulled his daughter into a tight hug. Ji-won, who had been trying to stay strong, started crying again. I'm so sorry this happened to you, her father said. This is unacceptable. We're going to sue that bank. We're going to sue that woman. She can't treat people like this. Ji-won pulled back from the hug and wiped her eyes. Dad, wait. I want to show you something first. She opened her laptop. While waiting for her father to come home, Ji-won had been searching online. The incident at the bank had already gone viral. Several people who had recorded videos posted them on social media. The hashtags were everywhere. Banking while black, discrimination, racism. Min Seok watched the videos with his jaw clenched. Seeing his daughter humiliated like that on screen made his hands shake with rage. The comments under the videos were divided. Many people supported Ji-won and called Sandra racist. Others claimed Ji-won must have done something to deserve suspicion. Some comments were just cruel. "This is evidence," Min Seok said. "We can use this. I'm calling a lawyer tonight." "I know," Ji-won said. "But Dad, something feels weird about the whole thing." Her father looked at her questioningly. "What do you mean?" Ji-won pulled up a new document on her laptop. She had been making notes all afternoon. Listen to what Sandra said. She kept talking about protecting the bank, about verifying sources, about money laundering. Those are really specific things. She was being racist, Min Seok said. That's what racists do. They find excuses, yes, but think about it. If she was just racist, she would have been rude and suspicious. But she was really aggressive. She wanted to call the police. She made a huge scene. Why? Min Seok sat down beside his daughter. Keep going. And another thing. When Maria helped me at the end, Sandra looked really angry. Not just annoyed. Actually angry. Like Maria had done something wrong by processing a normal deposit. Ji-won looked at her father. What if Sandra wasn't just being racist? What if there's something wrong with how that bank operates? Min Seok considered this. His anger started to shift into something else. Curiosity. He had worked in finance for 20 years. He knew that banks had very specific procedures for handling suspicious transactions. What Sandra did was not normal, even for someone who was discriminating. You remember my friend Soo Jin? He asked. Ji-won held up the business card. That's what made me think about this. What if we talked to her first, before we just sue? That evening they called Yoon Soo Jin. She invited them to dinner at her home the next day. She wanted to hear everything in detail. Soo Jin lived in a comfortable house in the suburbs. She was a small woman in her 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes. She hugged Min Seok like an old friend and shook Ji-won's hand warmly. Over dinner, Ji-won told her story again. This time she included every detail she could remember. What Sandra said, how she said it, the specific words she used, the way Mr. Peterson reacted, how Sandra insisted on handling everything herself. Soo Jin listened without interrupting. She took notes on her phone. When Ji-won finished, Soo Jin was quiet for a long moment. Can I see the videos? She asked finally. Ji-won showed her the clips that people had posted online. Soo Jin watched them several times, her expression growing more serious with each viewing. This is definitely discrimination, Soo Jin said. That part is clear. But you're right, Ji-won. Something else is strange here. What do you mean? Min Seok asked. Soo Jin set down her phone. I've worked in banking compliance for 15 years. I've seen many cases of discrimination. Usually the employee is subtly rude. They make the customer uncomfortable, so they leave. They delay service. They ask pointed questions. But they try to stay within policy guidelines. Sandra didn't do that, Ji-won said. Exactly. Sandra made a public spectacle. She used specific language about money laundering and source verification. That's the language of fraud prevention training. But the way she applied it was completely wrong. Soo Jin leaned forward. Here's what's interesting. When banks actually suspect money laundering, they don't confront the customer. They file a report with the federal government, quietly. Making a scene is the opposite of proper procedure. So what was she doing? Ji-won asked. I don't know yet, but I know someone who can help us find out. Soo Jin pulled out her own phone and made a call. Rachel, hi, it's Soo Jin. I need to talk to you about a case. Are you free this week? 2 days later, Ji-won and her father met Detective Rachel Morrison at a coffee shop downtown. Rachel was a black woman in her early 40s who worked for the Federal Banking Crimes Division. She had brought a colleague, Agent David Chen. Rachel ordered a coffee and sat down with her laptop. Soo Jin briefed me on your situation, she said to Ji-won. I've watched the videos. I'm sorry this happened to you. Thank you, Ji-won said. Soo Jin thinks there might be more to this than discrimination. Rachel continued. I tend to agree. So I did some preliminary research on Metropolitan Bank, specifically that downtown branch. She turned her laptop so they could see the screen. It showed graphs and charts with numbers and dates. These are transaction patterns for that branch over the last 18 months. Nothing immediately illegal, but there are some anomalies. What kind of anomalies? Minsuk asked. Agent Chen spoke up. Unusual cash deposit patterns. Several accounts making regular deposits just under $10,000. Why does that matter? Ji-won asked. Banks have to report cash transactions over $10,000 to the federal government, Rachel explained. It's to prevent money laundering. Some criminals try to avoid this by making multiple smaller deposits. We call it structuring. It's illegal, so the bank is helping people break the law? Ji-won was shocked. Maybe. Or maybe they're just not noticing. That's what we need to find out. Rachel closed her laptop. Here's what I'm proposing. You file a formal complaint about discrimination. That gives us an official reason to investigate. While we investigate the discrimination, we also look at the branch's overall practices. If we find evidence of fraud or other crimes, we pursue it. Will this help other people? Ji-won asked. I don't want this to just be about me getting money in a lawsuit. Rachel smiled. That's a good question. Yes, if we find systematic problems, we can force the bank to make changes. We can also identify other victims and make sure they get justice too. Ji-won looked at her father. He nodded. It's your choice, sweetie. Ji-won thought about all the times she had felt different, judged, suspected because of her skin color. She thought about how many other people might have walked into that bank and been treated the same way, how many just left and never came back, how many were too scared or embarrassed to fight back. Okay, she said. Let's do it. Over the next week, Rachel's team started their investigation quietly. They began by interviewing bank employees who were not friends with Sandra. They promised confidentiality. Slowly, people started talking. A young teller named Marcus told them about a time 2 years ago when Sandra refused to help a black college student open an account. Sandra claimed his student ID looked fake, even though it was clearly real. Another employee mentioned that Sandra always insisted on handling certain customers personally. These customers were usually older white men who made large cash deposits. Sandra processed their transactions quickly with no questions asked. The patterns became clearer. Sandra discriminated against young people of color, making their banking experience difficult, but she gave special treatment to certain other customers, asking them no questions even when their transactions seemed unusual. Rachel's financial investigation team pulled records for the branch. They needed a warrant for this, which Soo-jin helped them obtain based on the discrimination complaint. What they found was interesting. Sandra Whitmore had her own accounts at the bank, of course. Most employees did. But Sandra's accounts showed deposits that did not match her salary. Small amounts, usually a few $100s at a time, always cash. The deposits went back 3 years. Where is this money coming from? Agent Chen wondered. They also found records of the transactions Sandra processed for her preferred customers. Several of these involved cash deposits just under the reporting threshold, over and over again. Always the same few people. Always processed by Sandra with minimal documentation. Rachel met with Ji-won again to update her. We're finding some concerning things, she said carefully. I can't give you all the details yet because the investigation is ongoing. But I want you to know that your complaint has opened up something bigger. Is Sandra stealing money? Ji-won asked directly. Rachel paused. We're looking into several possibilities. Financial crimes are complex. We need to gather evidence carefully before we make accusations. What happens next? We continue investigating. We interview more people. We analyze more financial records. And in about a week, we're going to visit that bank. Rachel looked at Ji-won seriously. I'd like you to come with us. Ji-won felt her stomach drop. Go back there. I know it's hard, but I want Sandra Whitmore to see the consequences of her actions. I want her to understand that you didn't just go away. That actions have results. Rachel leaned forward. You don't have to if you don't want to. But I think it would be powerful. Ji-won thought about it for a long moment. The idea of walking back into that bank terrified her. But it also felt right. She had run away crying last time. This time she would walk in with federal agents. Okay, she said. I'll do it. That night, Sandra Whitmore sat in her living room scrolling through social media. The videos of her confronting Ji-won were everywhere. Her name was being shared. People were calling her racist. Some were calling her much worse things. Sandra called Mr. Peterson in a panic. We need to do something about this, she said. These videos make the bank look bad. What do you suggest? Peterson sounded tired. We put out a statement. We say the girl was rude first, that she refused to provide proper documentation, that I was just following procedure. Sandra, there's video evidence. The videos don't show everything. They don't show her attitude. We can control this narrative if we act fast. Mr. Peterson was quiet for a moment. I'll talk to corporate, he said finally. But Sandra, you need to be prepared. There might be an investigation. Make sure all your paperwork is in order. After Peterson hung up, Sandra sat in the dark, feeling afraid for the first time. An investigation. She thought about all the transactions she had processed, all the shortcuts she had taken, all the money she had accepted from customers who wanted discretion. It would be fine, she told herself. Nobody looked closely at branch records. Nobody cared about small stuff. The girl would sue, the bank would settle, and life would go on. But deep down, Sandra knew something had changed. That black teenage girl she had humiliated had not disappeared quietly, and somehow that scared Sandra more than she wanted to admit. Detective Rachel Morrison sat in her office reviewing interview transcripts. Over the past week, her team had spoken with dozens of people. What they discovered painted a disturbing picture. Jiwon was not Sandra's first victim. She was just the most public one. Rachel's assistant knocked on her door. The college student is here for his interview. Send him in, Rachel said. Seo-jun Lee walked in nervously. He was 22 years old, studying business at the local university. He sat down and twisted his hands in his lap. Thank you for coming in, Rachel said gently. I know this is difficult. Can you tell me about your experience with Sandra Whitmore? Seo-jun took a deep breath. It was 2 years ago. I was 20. I started a small business, a tutoring service for high school students. I needed to open a business account. What happened? I went to Metropolitan Bank because it was close to my apartment. I brought all my paperwork. Business license, tax ID number, everything. Sandra was the one who helped me. Seo-jun's voice grew quieter. She looked at my business plan and said it didn't seem legitimate. What did she mean by that? She said a tutoring business was suspicious, that I probably didn't have real clients. She asked if I was actually running some kind of illegal operation. Seo-jun looked up at Rachel. I'm Korean American. My business plan was professional. I had everything organized, but she treated me like I was lying. Did you file a complaint? Seo-jun shook his head. I was too intimidated. I just left and opened an account at a different bank. I thought maybe it was my fault somehow. Maybe my business plan wasn't good enough. Rachel made notes. It wasn't your fault, she said firmly. What Sandra did was discrimination. After Seo-jun left, Rachel interviewed 2 more people that afternoon. Amara Johnson was a 25-year-old teacher. She taught 4th grade at an elementary school and had worked there for 3 years. She came in wearing professional clothes and carrying a folder of documents. I tried to get pre-approved for a mortgage last year, Amara explained. I have good credit. I've been at my job for 3 years. I saved for a down payment. Everything was in order. Let me guess, Rachel said. Sandra Whitmore handled your application. Yes, she kept asking weird questions. Like, was my job stable? Would I really keep teaching? She made comments about teachers not making enough money, but I make a decent salary. And I showed her my tax returns. Amara's frustration was clear. Finally, she said she had concerns about my income stability. She denied my pre-approval. That doesn't make sense. Teachers have very stable jobs, guy. That's what I thought. I actually filed a complaint with the bank, but nothing happened. Mr. Peterson called me and said Sandra was just being thorough. He suggested I try again in 6 months. Amara crossed her arms. I went to a different bank instead. They approved me in 2 weeks. The 3rd interview that day was with Carlos Rivera. He was 19 years old, in his first year of community college. He looked young and scared. My grandmother gave me a check for $5,000, Carlos said, for college expenses. Books, tuition, stuff like that. She wrote the check to me from her account. And Sandra wouldn't cash it? Rachel guessed. She said it looked suspicious. A check that big from an old woman to a teenage boy? She said it might be fraud. She said maybe I was taking advantage of my grandmother. Carlos's voice shook with emotion. She made me feel like a criminal. Like I was stealing from my own abuela. What did you do? I called my grandmother. She had to come to the bank herself. She was so mad. She yelled at Sandra in Spanish and English. It was embarrassing for both of us. Carlos looked down. My grandmother is 73 years old. She shouldn't have to come to the bank to prove she wants to help her grandson. Rachel thanked Carlos for his time. After he left, she sat back in her chair and closed her eyes. 3 more victims. All young. All people of color. all treated like criminals for doing normal banking activities. But there was more to the story. Rachel's financial team had been working around the clock analyzing transaction records. Agent Chen came into her office with a thick file. "You need to see this," he said. He spread papers across Rachel's desk. They showed Sandra's transaction history for the past 3 years. Highlighted entries showed cash deposits to Sandra's personal account. Small amounts between $200 and $500. They happened about twice a month. "Where is this money coming from?" Rachel asked. "That's the question. It doesn't match any legitimate income source. Not her salary. Not gifts, nothing." Chen pulled out another set of papers. "Now look at this. These are the customers Sandra gives special treatment to. The ones she processes quickly with no questions." The papers showed 5 different customers, all older white men. All made regular cash deposits to their accounts. Always under $10,000. Sometimes $9,000, sometimes $8,500. Never the same amount twice in a row. "Structuring," Rachel said. "Exactly. They're avoiding the federal reporting requirement, and Sandra is helping them do it." Chen pulled out more papers. "Here's where it gets interesting. On the same days Sandra processes these suspicious deposits, she makes cash deposits to her own account. The timing matches too closely to be coincidence." Rachel studied the papers carefully. "She's taking a cut. These customers pay her to process their transactions without asking questions or filing reports. That's what it looks like. We're talking about roughly $200,000 in unreported cash deposits over 3 years. If Sandra is taking 5%, that's $10,000 in illegal payments. Do we know what these customers are doing? Why they need to hide their cash?" Chen shook his head. "Not yet. Could be tax evasion. Could be money laundering. Could be legitimate business owners trying to hide income from the IRS. We'll need to investigate each one." Rachel stood up and paced her office. The picture was becoming clear. Sandra discriminated against young people of color, making scenes and driving them away. This served 2 purposes. First, it satisfied her personal racism. Second, it created chaos and distraction. While everyone was watching Sandra humiliate a black teenager or a Korean college student, nobody noticed the older white men she processed without questions. Nobody wondered why she never filed suspicious activity reports. The discrimination was both hate and strategy. "We need to look at Mr. Peterson too," Rachel said. "Is he involved or just incompetent?" "We're pulling his records now," Chen replied. "But he approved some of these transactions. He signed off on Sandra's decisions. Either he's part of it or he's willfully blind." That evening, Rachel called Ji-won to update her. She couldn't share all the details of the investigation, but she wanted Ji-won to know she wasn't alone. "We've identified at least 3 other people Sandra discriminated against," Rachel said. "All young people of color. All treated like criminals for normal banking activities." Ji-won was quiet for a moment. "Do they know about each other?" "Not yet. But I'd like to bring everyone together before we go to the bank, if you're all comfortable with it." "I'd like to meet them," Ji-won said, "to know I'm not the only one." 2 days later, Rachel organized a meeting at her office. Ji-won arrived with her father. She was nervous. What if the others blamed her for making the situation public? What if they thought she was looking for attention? Her worries disappeared when she walked into the conference room. Seo-jun stood up immediately and smiled at her. "You're the girl from the videos," he said. "Thank you for speaking up. I wish I had been that brave 2 years ago." Amara hugged Ji-won like they were old friends. "I filed a complaint and nothing happened," she said. "But you got federal agents involved." "That's amazing." Carlos was shy at first, but he shook Ji-won's hand. "My grandmother saw your videos. She said you remind her of me, someone who deserves better." They spent an hour sharing their stories. Each one was different in details, but the same in pattern. Sandra saw young people of color and assumed they were criminals. She questioned their money, their documents, their intentions. She made them feel small and ashamed for existing. "I thought it was just me," Amara said. "I thought maybe I really wasn't ready for a mortgage. I thought my business plan was bad." Seo-jun admitted. "I thought I was doing something wrong by accepting money from my grandmother," Carlos said quietly. Ji-won understood completely. "I thought I looked suspicious somehow. Like maybe I should have dressed differently or brought more proof." Rachel let them talk. This was important. They needed to understand that the problem was Sandra, not them. That they had done nothing wrong. "There's something else you should know," Rachel said when they were ready. Sandra wasn't just discriminating. She was committing financial crimes, using her position to help certain customers break the law, taking money from them in return. The room went silent. So she was extra mean to us to hide other bad stuff? Carlos asked. Basically, yes. While everyone was watching her humiliate you, nobody noticed the crime she was committing with other customers. That's messed up, Seojun said. He looked at Jiwon. But you caught her. By not staying quiet. Rachel explained the plan for the next week. They would visit the bank with warrants. They would interview Sandra and Mr. Peterson formally. They would seize records and computers. It would be public. There would be media attention. I'd like all of you to be there if you're willing, Rachel said. Not for the interviews. Just to be present. To show that you're real people Sandra hurt. That this isn't some abstract investigation. I'll be there, Amara said immediately. Me too. Seojun agreed. Carlos hesitated. Will my grandmother have to be involved? I don't want to stress her out. No, Rachel promised. This is just about you. About what Sandra did to you. Then I'll come. They all looked at Jiwon. She was the youngest, the one who started everything. I'm definitely coming, she said. I want to see her face when she realizes what's happening. Over the next few days, Rachel's team prepared for the bank visit. They obtained warrants for financial records, computers, and phones. They coordinated with the bank's corporate office, who were shocked to learn about the investigation. They prepared interview questions and evidence folders. Meanwhile, Sandra grew increasingly paranoid. The viral videos had died down a bit, but she knew something was wrong. Employees were being pulled aside for quiet conversations. People looked at her strangely. Mr. Peterson had been distant and nervous all week. She started deleting emails. Old messages about customer transactions she had processed. Communications with her preferred customers. She thought about the cash in her home safe, nearly $12,000 she had collected over the years. Maybe she should move it somewhere else. But where? And wouldn't that look suspicious if anyone was watching? Sandra told herself she was being paranoid. The bank wouldn't investigate their own employee over some teenager's complaint. They would settle with the girl and everything would go back to normal. It had to. On Sunday night, Sandra couldn't sleep. She kept seeing Jiwon's face on her phone screen. Those videos had been viewed millions of times. Her name was out there. People knew who she was. Some had even found her social media accounts and were leaving angry comments. She should have been quieter. She should have just refused the deposit without making a scene. But the girl had annoyed her with her neat paperwork and her respectful voice. Like she belonged there. Like she had every right to walk into that bank with thousands of dollars. People like that needed to learn their place. Sandra had thought she was teaching a lesson. Instead, she might have made a terrible mistake. Monday morning arrived. Sandra got ready for work slowly, her stomach in knots. She told herself everything would be fine. Just a normal Monday at the bank. Process transactions. Help customers. Go home. But when she pulled into the parking lot, she saw 3 black SUVs parked near the entrance, official government vehicles. Her hands started shaking on the steering wheel. This was not going to be a normal Monday. Jiwon Park walked through the doors of Metropolitan Bank for the second time in 2 weeks. This time was very different. This time she was not alone. Detective Rachel Morrison walked beside her, wearing a dark suit and carrying a leather folder. Behind them came Agent Chen and 2 other federal investigators. Min Seok walked on Jiwon's other side, his hand on her shoulder for support. Their attorney, Grace Chen, followed close behind with her own briefcase. The bank lobby went quiet. Customers who were waiting in line turned to stare. Tellers stopped what they were doing. Everyone seemed to sense that something important was happening. Sandra Whitmore stood at her usual counter. When she saw Jiwon, all the color drained from her face. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. She looked at the federal agents, then back at Jiwon, then at the agents again. Her hands started to tremble. Rachel walked directly toward Sandra with confident steps. Her voice was calm, but loud enough to carry through the quiet bank. Sandra Whitmore? I'm Detective Rachel Morrison with the Federal Banking Crimes Division. We need to speak with you and your manager immediately. Sandra tried to take a step backward, but there was nowhere to go. I don't understand. What is this about? We can discuss that privately, Rachel said. She held up a document. This is a federal warrant authorizing us to investigate this branch for multiple violations. Where is Mr. Peterson? The branch manager's door opened. Mr. Peterson emerged looking confused and worried. He was a thin man who always looked slightly uncomfortable in his suit. Today he looked terrified. "I'm James Peterson, branch manager. What's going on here?" Rachel showed him the warrant as well. "We're investigating allegations of banking discrimination, suspicious transaction handling, and potential fraud. We need to speak with you and Ms. Whitmore. We also need access to your financial records and computer systems." Peterson's face went pale. He looked at Sandra, who looked like she might faint. "Of course," he said weakly. "Whatever you need. Should I call our corporate attorney?" "That's your right," Rachel said. "But this is happening now. Agent Chen and Agent Park will be interviewing your staff. Agent Williams will be securing your computer systems and financial records. Ms. Whitmore and Mr. Peterson, please come with me to the conference room." Sandra finally found her voice. "This is because of her, isn't it?" She pointed at Jiwon with a shaking hand. "That girl is lying. I was just doing my job. I was protecting the bank." Rachel's expression hardened. "Ms. Whitmore, I strongly suggest you stop talking and cooperate. Anything you say right now can be used as evidence." The other customers in the bank were definitely paying attention now. Several had their phones out recording again. This was going to be online within minutes, just like the first incident. Maria, the young teller who had helped Jiwon before, watched everything with wide eyes. When Jiwon caught her gaze, Maria gave her a small nod of support. Jiwon nodded back. Rachel escorted Sandra and Peterson toward the conference room at the back of the bank. Agent Chen started calling employees aside one by one for interviews. Agent Williams went directly to the computer room with a team of technical specialists. Jiwon sat down in the lobby with her father and Grace Chen. She felt strange being back here. The place that had humiliated her so badly now felt different. People were looking at her with respect, even curiosity. She was not a suspected criminal today. Today she was someone important. Min Seok squeezed his daughter's hand. "How are you feeling?" "Weird," Jiwon admitted. "Scared but also glad. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," Grace Chen said. She was a sharp woman in her 50s who specialized in civil rights cases. "You're seeing justice happen in real time. That's powerful but also overwhelming." In the conference room, Rachel sat across from Sandra and Peterson. She opened her leather folder and pulled out several documents. She laid them on the table one by one, taking her time. "Let me explain what's happening," Rachel said calmly. 2 weeks ago, Jiwon Park attempted to make a legitimate deposit at this bank. She was subjected to public humiliation and accusations of criminal activity despite providing proper documentation. That incident was recorded and filed as a formal discrimination complaint. "I was following procedure," Sandra interrupted. "Large cash deposits require verification." Rachel held up a hand. "Please don't interrupt. You'll have a chance to speak." She pulled out more documents. "During our investigation into the discrimination complaint, we discovered a pattern. Over the past 5 years, at least 8 young people of color have reported similar treatment from you. Ms. Whitmore, accusations of fraud, demands for excessive documentation, public questioning of their legitimacy." Peterson looked shocked. 8 people? I only knew about 1 or 2 complaints." "Because you dismissed them," Rachel said sharply. "Multiple complaints were filed. You took no serious action. That's why we're investigating you as well, Mr. Peterson." She pulled out more papers. These were financial records with highlighted sections. But the discrimination was only part of the problem. While investigating, we discovered something else interesting. "Ms. Whitmore, can you explain these deposits to your personal account?" Sandra looked at the papers. Her face went from pale to red. "Those are my own money. You have no right to look at my personal finances. We have every right with a federal warrant. These deposits don't match any legitimate income source. They're always cash. They always happen around the same time you process certain customer transactions." Rachel laid out more documents. "These are records of customers you've processed with minimal questions. Large cash deposits always under $10,000. Always during your shifts, always handled personally by you." Peterson leaned forward to look at the documents. His eyes went wide. "Sandra, what is this?" "It's nothing," Sandra said quickly. "These are regular customers. Longtime clients of the bank. They trust me to handle their transactions." "They trust you not to report them," Rachel corrected. "Banks are required to report cash transactions over $10,000. These customers are deliberately structuring their deposits to avoid that requirement. And you're helping them. In exchange for cash payments, the room went silent. Sandra's hands were shaking badly now. Peterson looked like he might be sick. That's not true, Sandra stammered. You're making assumptions. Rachel pulled out another document. We've interviewed several of your colleagues. They've described how you always insist on handling certain customers personally, how you get angry when others try to help them, how you process their transactions faster than normal while making others wait. That's not a crime. That's customer service. It's a crime when you're taking bribes to violate federal banking regulations. Rachel's voice was hard now. We've identified approximately $200,000 in unreported structured deposits over 3 years. You received roughly $10,000 in payments. That's fraud, Ms. Whitmore. That's aiding in money laundering. Those are federal crimes. Sandra started crying. Real tears, not fake ones. I needed the money. My divorce. My expenses. I wasn't hurting anyone. You were hurting everyone, Rachel said. You were helping criminals hide money. You were violating the trust people put in banks. And you were using discrimination to distract from your crimes. Peterson found his voice. What do you mean distract? Think about it, Mr. Peterson. When did Ms. Whitmore make her scenes with young customers? Always during busy times. Always loud in public. While everyone was watching her humiliate a teenager. Nobody noticed the questionable transactions she was processing quietly. Peterson looked at Sandra with horror. You used racism as a cover for fraud? Sandra couldn't answer. She just kept crying. Rachel stood up. Sandra Whitmore, you're being terminated from this bank effective immediately. You'll be formally charged with multiple counts of fraud, aiding in structuring and receiving illegal payments. The discrimination cases will proceed separately through civil proceedings. What about me? Peterson asked quietly. I didn't know about the fraud. That's what we're determining. You approved suspicious transactions. You ignored discrimination complaints. Either you were involved or you were criminally negligent. Either way, you're suspended pending investigation. Rachel opened the conference room door. 2 agents were waiting outside. Please escort Ms. Whitmore out of the building. Mr. Peterson, you'll need to stay while we finish securing evidence. Sandra stood on shaky legs. As agents led her toward the door, she had to walk past G1 in the lobby. For a moment, their eyes met. Sandra looked like she wanted to say something. Maybe an apology, maybe another excuse. But she said nothing. She just walked past with her head down. Ji-won watched her go. She didn't feel happy or triumphant. She felt something more complicated. Justice was happening, but it was still sad to see someone's life fall apart, even someone who had hurt her. Rachel came out into the lobby and motioned for Ji-won and her family to join her. They went to a quiet corner of the bank. That was hard to watch, I'm sure, Rachel said to Ji-won. It was strange, Ji-won admitted. I wanted her to face consequences. But seeing her cry like that was uncomfortable. That's normal. You're a good person. Good people don't enjoy seeing others suffer, even when that suffering is deserved. Rachel pulled out a small notebook. I want you to know that we couldn't have done this without you. Your complaint opened the investigation. Your courage to come back today showed Sandra that actions have consequences. What happens now? Min Seok asked. Sandra will be formally charged within the week. We're still investigating her customers to determine what crimes they were hiding. Mr. Peterson will likely be fired, but might avoid charges if he cooperates fully. Rachel looked at Ji-won. As for the discrimination cases, we've identified 8 victims total. We'd like to bring you all together for a formal complaint. The bank will likely settle to avoid a trial. Grace Chen nodded approvingly. We can work with that. But we also want policy changes, not just money. Agreed, Rachel said. The bank's corporate office is already promising reforms. We'll make sure they follow through. Outside the bank, news cameras had arrived. Word had spread that federal agents were investigating Metropolitan Bank. Reporters were setting up on the sidewalk, trying to get shots through the windows. Rachel noticed them. Would you like to make a statement? She asked Ji-won. You don't have to, but this is your chance to tell your story properly, not through viral videos. Ji-won looked at her father. He smiled encouragingly. It's up to you, sweetie. Ji-won thought about it. 2 weeks ago, she left this bank crying and humiliated. Today, she could leave with her head high. She could speak the truth. She could help other people understand what happened. Yes, she said. I want to make a statement. They walked outside together. Reporters immediately started shouting questions. Rachel held up a hand for quiet and then stepped aside to let Ji-won speak. Ji-won stood in front of the cameras. She was just 17 years old. She should have been nervous, but she had already faced the worst. She had been publicly humiliated and called a criminal. She had fought back and won. What were a few cameras compared to that? "My name is Ji-won Park," she began. Her voice was clear and steady. 2 weeks ago, I came to this bank to deposit money I earned from working all summer. Money I received as a scholarship for my grades. Money my family gave me for my birthday. I was treated like a criminal because of the color of my skin. She paused. The cameras kept recording. But when I investigated what happened, I discovered something bigger. The person who discriminated against me was also committing crimes. She was helping people break the law and getting paid for it. She used racism to hide fraud. Ji-won looked directly at the cameras. "I'm sharing this story because I want other young people to know that when something wrong happens to you, you don't have to stay quiet. You don't have to accept being treated badly. Ask questions. Demand answers. Fight for justice." She took a breath. "I also want to thank Detective Morrison and her team for taking my complaint seriously, for investigating thoroughly, for believing that I deserved better treatment. And I want to thank the other victims who came forward. We're stronger together. What do you want to happen now?" A reporter called out. "I want the bank to change," Ji-won said simply.
"I want them to train their employees to treat everyone with respect.
"I want them to take discrimination complaints seriously. I want young people, especially young people of color, to feel safe doing their banking." That's not too much to ask. More questions came, but Grace Chen stepped forward. "That's all for now. Thank you." They walked to their car through a crowd of reporters. Ji-won felt exhausted, but also lighter somehow. She had told her truth. She had stood up for herself and others. She had made a difference. As they drove away from the bank, Ji-won looked back one more time. Federal agents were still inside, gathering evidence. Sandra's life was over in many ways. But maybe, just maybe, the bank would actually change. And maybe other young people facing discrimination would remember her story, would remember that they could fight back, that they could win. That thought made everything worth it. The story exploded across the news within hours. Every major network covered it. A 17-year-old black girl had exposed not just discrimination, but actual banking fraud. The story had everything: racism, crime, federal investigations, and a young hero who refused to stay silent. Ji-won's phone would not stop ringing. News producers wanted interviews. Podcasters wanted to tell her story. Civil rights organizations wanted her to speak at events. It was overwhelming. "You don't have to do any of this," Min-seok told his daughter that evening. They were sitting in their living room, Ji-won's phone buzzing constantly on the table between them. "You've done enough. You can just let the legal process continue." Ji-won picked up her phone and scrolled through the messages. So many people wanted something from her, but some messages were different. They were from other young people who had experienced discrimination. People thanking her for speaking up. People saying her courage inspired them to report their own experiences. "I want to do some of it," Ji-won said slowly. "Not everything, but some. If my story can help other people, I should share it." Grace Chen helped Ji-won decide which request to accept. They agreed to one major television interview with a respected journalist. They agreed to speak at a few civil rights events. Everything else they politely declined. The television interview aired 1 week after Sandra's arrest. The journalist was a black woman named Patricia Williams, who had covered civil rights issues for 20 years. She treated Ji-won with respect but asked real questions. "Were you afraid when you went back to the bank with federal agents?" Patricia asked. "Yes," Ji-won admitted. "I was terrified. But I was also angry, and I wanted Sandra to see that I didn't just disappear, that treating people badly has consequences. Some people online have said you overreacted, that you made too big a deal out of one rude employee. What do you say to that?" Ji-won had expected this question. "I would say they're missing the point. Sandra wasn't just rude. She publicly accused me of being a criminal. She tried to have me arrested for depositing my own money. And she had done the same thing to at least 7 other people. If I stayed quiet, she would have kept doing it." Patricia nodded. "And then you discovered the fraud." "That was unexpected," Ji-won said. I just wanted to understand why she treated me that way. I thought maybe there was a policy I didn't know about. Instead, I found out she was committing actual crimes. The interview made Ji-won look thoughtful and brave without being preachy. People responded well to it. The comments online were mostly positive. Of course, some people still criticized her. Some said she was looking for attention. Others made racist remarks. But the support far outweighed the negativity. Meanwhile, Sandra Whitmore's life was falling apart completely. The media dug into her background and found more ugly truths. Her social media posts included subtle but clear racist messages. Comments about those people in certain neighborhoods. Screenshots spread across the internet. Her lawyer negotiated a plea deal. Sandra would plead guilty to multiple counts of fraud and aiding in structuring transactions. She would cooperate fully with the investigation into her customers. In exchange, she would receive a reduced sentence of 3 to 5 years in federal prison, plus full restitution to the bank and the customers she defrauded. The discrimination cases were handled separately. All 8 victims, including Ji-won, filed a joint civil suit against both Sandra personally and Metropolitan Bank. The bank wanted to avoid a trial. Bad publicity was already hurting their business. They needed to settle quickly. The settlement negotiations took 2 months. Grace Chen was tough. She demanded not just money but policy changes, real meaningful changes that would prevent this from happening again. Metropolitan Bank agreed to pay $300,000 split among the 8 victims. Ji-won would receive $50,000 as the primary plaintiff. The others would receive between $20,000 and $40,000 each depending on the severity of their cases. But more importantly, the bank agreed to major reforms. All employees would undergo mandatory racial bias training 4 times per year. A new hotline would be established for discrimination complaints, managed by an outside company not controlled by the bank. Every complaint would be investigated by a neutral third party. Results would be publicly reported. The bank also agreed to hire Dr. Kenya Thompson, a respected diversity consultant, to completely overhaul their customer service protocols. They would create a youth advisory board to help them better serve younger customers. They would partner with historically black colleges and universities for recruitment. These changes will help thousands of people, Grace told Ji-won when the settlement was finalized. Yes, you're getting money, but you're also changing an entire institution. That's real power. Mr. Peterson, the branch manager, was fired but avoided criminal charges. He testified that he had been negligent but not intentionally criminal. He had trusted Sandra too much and ignored warning signs. The investigation found no evidence he had received any illegal payments. He was stupid, not corrupt. Peterson issued a public apology. I failed in my duty as a manager. I dismissed complaints that I should have investigated. I let prejudice and possible criminal activity happen under my supervision. I'm deeply sorry to all the people who were hurt because of my failure. It sounded sincere but also carefully written by lawyers. Ji-won read it and felt nothing. Peterson had hurt her by doing nothing. That was almost worse than Sandra's active cruelty. The other 7 victims each had their own reactions to the settlement and the publicity. Seo-jun Lee was relieved. His tutoring business had grown successfully despite Sandra's rejection, but the settlement money would help him expand. He used part of it to open a second location and hired 2 other tutors. Amara Johnson finally bought her house. The mortgage that Sandra had blocked went through easily at a different bank. She used her settlement money for the down payment. When she moved in, she invited Ji-won to visit. They stood in Amara's new living room and hugged. We did this together, Amara said, all of us refusing to accept being treated badly. Carlos Rivera gave half his settlement money to his grandmother. She came to the bank for me when I was embarrassed, he explained. This money belongs to both of us. His grandmother cried and told everyone in their family what a good grandson she had. The investigation into Sandra's preferred customers revealed their crimes. 3 were small business owners evading taxes by hiding cash income. One was involved in illegal gambling. Another was hiding money from his ex-wife during a divorce. All faced their own legal consequences. Interestingly, one of the customers was shocked to learn what Sandra was doing. He was an older man who owned a restaurant. He made large cash deposits from his business regularly. He thought Sandra was just being friendly and helpful. He had no idea she was failing to file required reports or that his deposits looked like structuring. "I always reported my income properly on taxes," he told investigators. "I just didn't know about the deposit reporting requirements. I would have followed the rules if someone explained them to me." This man faced no charges because he had not intentionally broken any laws, but it showed another problem. Banks needed to educate customers about regulations, not just police them. Sandra had failed at both. 6 months after the incident, Metropolitan Bank held a ceremony at the downtown branch. They were unveiling their new policies and introducing their reformed management team. Jennifer Washington, a black woman with 25 years of banking experience, was the new branch manager. All 8 victims were invited to attend. Ji-won almost didn't go. She was tired of being in the spotlight. She wanted to just be a normal teenager finishing her senior year of high school. But Grace Chen convinced her. "These changes happened because of you," Grace said. "You should see them officially recognized." The branch looked different. New signs explained customer rights in multiple languages. Information about the discrimination hotline was posted prominently. The staff was more diverse. 3 of the new tellers were young people of color. Maria, who had helped Ji-won during the original incident, had been promoted to assistant manager. When Ji-won arrived, Maria greeted her warmly. "Thank you," Maria said quietly. "I wanted to speak up for you that day, but I was scared. Watching you fight back made me braver." Jennifer Washington gave a speech about the bank's commitment to change. She acknowledged the failures that had led to this moment. She promised to do better. It was a good speech, professional and sincere. Then Jennifer invited Ji-won to speak. Ji-won had prepared a few words but kept them simple. 6 months ago, I walked into this bank excited to deposit money I had earned. I left humiliated and angry. Today I'm walking in to see real changes. Changes that will help thousands of people who come after me. Ji-won looked around at the diverse staff, the new signs, the people gathered to witness this moment. This branch isn't perfect. No place is perfect. But it's better because people refuse to accept discrimination as normal. Because we demanded accountability. Because we insisted that banks treat all customers with respect. She paused. That's not my victory alone. It's ours, all of us together. The audience applauded. Cameras flashed. But Ji-won noticed something more important. A young black teenager, maybe 14, stood with his mother near the back. He was watching Ji-won with wide, hopeful eyes. After the ceremony, he approached her nervously. "I saw your story on the news," he said. "I'm about to open my first bank account. I was scared, but seeing you made me feel braver." Ji-won smiled at him. "You should feel brave. You have rights. You deserve respect. If anyone treats you badly, you can speak up, and people will listen." The boy's mother touched Ji-won's arm. "Thank you for fighting," she said simply. That moment meant more to Ji-won than all the news coverage, all the money, all the public recognition. She had helped this one kid feel safe doing something that should be simple. That was real change. As the ceremony ended, Ji-won walked around the branch with her father. She passed the counter where Sandra had humiliated her. She remembered how small she felt that day. How powerless. How embarrassed. Now she felt different. Not because she was famous or because she won money, but because she had refused to accept injustice. She had asked questions. She had demanded accountability, and she had helped make things better. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Seo-jun in their group chat with all 8 victims. They had stayed in touch, supporting each other through the legal process and the media attention. The message included a photo of all of them together at the ceremony. Underneath, Seo-jun had written, "We are stronger together." Thank you, Jiwon, for starting this. Amara replied. Thank you to all of us for finishing it. Carlos added. My grandmother says we're all heroes. I think she's right. Jiwon smiled and put her phone away. They were heroes, not the dramatic kind from movies. Just ordinary people who refused to stay silent when something wrong happened to them. Just young people who believed they deserved better and were willing to fight for it. As Jiwon left the bank for what she hoped would be the last time, she thought about her future. She had been accepted to several good universities. The scholarship money plus the settlement meant she could attend without worrying about finances. She was thinking about studying economics or maybe law. She wanted to understand how systems work so she could change them when they were unfair. Sandra Whitmore would begin her prison sentence in 2 weeks. Jiwon had read the sentencing report. Sandra showed remorse but also tried to minimize her crimes. She still didn't fully understand what she had done wrong. Maybe she never would. Jiwon didn't hate Sandra anymore. She felt something more like pity. Sandra had let racism and greed destroy her life. She had hurt people because she saw them as less than human, and now she would spend years in prison thinking about those choices. That was Sandra's burden to carry. Jiwon had her own future to build. A future where she would keep fighting for justice. A future where she would help others find their voices. A future where no teenager would be humiliated at a bank simply for existing while black. Ready to go home? Min Seok asked his daughter. Yes, Jiwon said. She took one last look at the bank, at the place where her life had changed. Then she walked away with her head held high. She was ready for whatever came next.